Welcome everyone to Pathways to the Orchard. Today we'll be learning Parshat Ve'etchanan, second Parsha in the book of Devarim. So the Parsha begins, it's a packed Parsha, lots of very important things, including the repeat of the Ten Commandments and the Shema. We'll be learning later different things about the Shema. But the beginning begins, V'etchanan el Hashem be'et hahi lemor. And I pleaded with God at that time, saying, and it goes on that Moshe is asking God, please let me go into the land of Israel. And we see that God's answer is no. You can go up to the mountain and see the land, but you will not be leading Israel into the land. Hopefully everyone will check out the numerical gem of today that was posted today in the WhatsApp. And it talks about the numerical value of Ve'etchanan and other things that are attached to it. So everyone is welcome to do that. But here I want to jump to the 25th verse of chapter 3. And it says, so in the second verse, Moshe puts forth his plea. Please let me go into the land. No, excuse me. The second verse is his introduction. He's like praising God. In the third verse, then he asks specifically, please let me, here it says, let me cross over and see this good land. And later, he's allowed to see it because God says, go up to the mountain and you'll be able to see it. But of course, God does not acquiesce to his request to come into the land. So in the 26th verse, it says, Vayit aber Hashem bi lem'anchem. And God was angry at me because of you. Lo Shema Elai, and he did not listen to me. V'yomar Hashem Elai, Rav loch, lo tosif daber alai od b'davar hazeh. And God said to me, enough. Do not continue to ask me more about this thing. So here it says, God got angry at me. So I want to go back to the previous Parsha, Parsha Devarim. And there in the first chapter, the 37th verse, anyone who wants to follow. So there, Moshe is giving over to the people. Remember, this is a new generation coming in to the land of Israel. And he's reviewing the 40 years in the desert. And he reminds them of the whole issue of sending spies. And the result of sending the spies was that their whole generation would have to wander for 40 years in the desert. And only Yehoshua and Caleb, the ones that spoke up for going into Israel, would be allowed to go in. And there it says in the 37th verse, it says, Gam bi hitanaf Hashem biglalchem. And also me, God, this is a different word of anger, got angry because of you. Same, Gam ata lo tavosham. You too will not go there. Now, there's something, it's very subtle, but it's very, very important. Here, this is in the middle of the story about the spies. And Moshe says, and God became angry at me because of you, which is very similar to our verse in Be'et Hanan, that God became angry at me because of you. But here, it seems to be in relationship to the spies. Now, if you would ask anyone, why was Moshe not allowed to go into the land of Israel? So we would naturally answer, because of the whole incident of Moshe hitting the rock. And there, God says specifically, because you did not sanctify me in the eyes of the people, you will not lead them into Eretz Yisrael. So the question is, why is it saying here, and also in Ve'et Hanan, that God got angry at me because of you? So this implies that Moshe was included somehow in the decree of not coming into Eretz Yisrael because of the spies. Now, a few weeks ago, we discussed this at length. And I'm not going to go back into it, but there are many, many reasons given why the decree that Moshe couldn't go into the land. One was he got angry at the people. Another one is he lost his patience with the people, that he didn't fulfill God's request of speaking to the rock. We discussed the idea that many years before, Eldad and Medad prophesied in the camp that Moshe would not be bringing Israel into the land and Yeshua would be. And there's also the possibility that Moshe is so connected to the will of God that he makes this mistake of hitting the rock and not speaking to it, because ultimately it was God's will that he doesn't come into the land. But here, the point we're trying to make is that it seems what the Torah is implying is the reason that he couldn't come into the land is connected to his sending the spies. And the later event of his hitting the rock instead of speaking to it was what we would call the excuse that God hangs this decree on. So this is a very, very interesting thing. So the commentaries say, well, what did Moshe do wrong by sending the spies? So there's a whole list of possibilities of Moshe, what Moshe did. Moshe stood up to the people many times. He could have very simply said, I'm sorry, but God already promised us to bring us into the land, and we don't need to send spies. They were on their way to Eretz Yisrael. We're just going. But he didn't do that. And the way he worded what the spies should be checking out opened the possibility of their coming back, instead of just saying, go and just check out how fruitful the land is and come back and tell the people so they'll be encouraged. But instead he said, check it out. Are the cities walled? What are the people like? What are their defenses like? So he opened up like Pandora's box for the spies to come back and say, whoa, they're way too strong for us. We won't be able to do this. However we want to say it, Moshe himself is implying that his not being allowed to come into the land is somehow connected to his sending the spies. And later in Ve'et Hanan, a third time, this is in chapter 4, verse 21, again, a third time, Moshe says that God got angry with me because of your words. Hashem hitanaf bi al divrechem. V'yishpa labilti avar et Yarden Labilti ba el ha'aretz tova asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha nachala. That God became angry at me because of your words, and he promised that I would not cross the Jordan, and I would not come into this good land that Hashem is giving you as an inheritance. So that is just to understand, trying to understand the literal understanding here. So it seems that it wasn't just hitting the rock. There was also some we'll call it lacking in Moshe's judgment in allowing the spies to go in the first place. If you remember back in Shlach Lecha, so the first Rashi, it says, Shlach Lecha, send. And it sounds like God is commanding Moshe to send. But Rashi brings the tradition that God is saying, if you want to send spies, you send. I'm not commanding you to send spies. So here again, we could see that there's a possibility that for whatever reason in God's accounting, Moshe was not meant to bring the people into the land. And here he had two excuses. One was the spies, and one was hitting the rock. But in a very deep way, we could say, did either one of those merit not letting Moshe come into the land? Everyone makes mistakes. Moshe also makes mistakes. But for that reason, he shouldn't be able to lead the people into the land after 40 years, everything that Moshe had done. And so here we could see that on a certain level, and it's brought down that had Moshe brought the people into the land, he would have become Mashiach, he would have built the temple, and he would have been able to fix the whole world. So we'd ask, what's wrong with that? That sounds pretty good. But God was saying the world, it doesn't merit it right now. It would be forced. And so in a certain way, Moshe just wasn't meant to come into Eretz Yisrael in a certain way, not because of any lacking of his. It was more the lacking of Bnei Yisrael in the world, which was simply just not ready for that kind of revelation. That is all an introduction to what I really want to get to it here. And that is the wording, Vayita ber Hashem bi lemanchem, that God became angry with me because of you. And the Arizal had an awesome explanation of what this means on a deeper level. The word vayit aber, which is one of the words for anger. But as we know, Hebrew words have many different meanings. So one of the roots of ayin bet resh is to become pregnant. And this goes along with the Ari's teaching that along with reincarnation, along with Gilgulei Nishamot, there is a concept called Ibur. Ibur literally means impregnated. And the Ari explains that this, along with reincarnation, actually in the coming weeks, one of the numerical gems will be about reincarnation. That reincarnation is considered a chesed. God is giving us another chance to fix whatever we have to fix, to improve, to elevate our soul. And Ibur, when you first hear it, for many people it sounds a little bit spooky, but the Ari revealed that for two different reasons, a soul can a soul that has left this world can impregnate itself in a living soul for one of two reasons. The living soul is having a hard time or is having a challenge and is having a difficulty overcoming this challenge. And the Ari reveals that every soul is part of a much bigger family of soul roots. And in other words, we're not alone here. We actually have many, many, many souls that we're connected to in this world and in the upper worlds. And so sometimes a soul will impregnate itself. It could be for a minute, could be for an hour, a day, a month, a year, in order to help a living soul accomplish what it needs to accomplish. A second reason is that the soul that is departed, the person in this world is about to do a tikkun, a rectification. And it's a rectification that the soul that left this world was not able to do. And so this soul will attach itself in order that it can share in the rectification that the soul in this world is about to do. Now, the reason I'm saying all of this is the Ari explained what Moshe is saying here on a very, very deep level. Again, it never cancels out the literal meaning, but is saying that Hashem takes the soul of Moshe and impregnates it in every generation, l'manchem, for your sake. So I'm going to read the words again in Hebrew. Vayitaber Hashem bi l'manchem. That, again, at first we translated that God became angry at me because of you. But the Ari is reading it also as that God made the soul of Moshe, that it would come back into the world for the sake of the people in every generation. And that's why the Zohar, in two different places, in one place it says that the soul of Moshe is found in every generation. And in another statement of the Zohar, it says that the soul of Moshe will not just impregnate itself, but will reincarnate itself every 50 years. Every 50 years, which is like a generation. Many times we think of a generation as 40 years, but it's very close. And so here, this is the idea that's given over the Zohar, that especially in the leaders of every generation, there is a spark of Moshe. It doesn't mean that the entire soul of Moshe or the leader of the generation is simply a reincarnation of Moshe. It means a part of the soul of Moshe will be found in the leaders of every generation. And so later, the Alter Rebbe said that he went even one step further and said, just like the Baal Shem Tov said that a spark of Mashiach is found in every Jew, the Alter Rebbe said a spark of Moshe is found in every Jew. What is that spark of Moshe? The intellect, the seichel, is in every Jew. So Rav Ginsburg explains that the soul of Moshe is the most present soul in all of humanity, in all of history. And he brings the teaching from the Arizal that the three letters of Moshe stand for, the Mem is Moshe, the Shin is Shet, in English Seth, And the Hay is Hevel, Abel. Abel, Cain and Abel are the first children of Adam and Eve. Cain kills Abel, and then they have another son named Shet. And the Torah says specifically that Shet was instead of the soul of Abel, which led the Ari to explain that it means that that's the beginning of the cycles of reincarnation. That the first reincarnated soul was Seth, who had a part of Abel. And so Moshe, his soul goes all the way back to Hevel and Shet. And then, as the Zohar says, that the soul of Moshe is found in every generation, in every generation. And so Rav Ginsburg brings a beautiful, talking about numerical gems, is we know that Moshe was 120 years old when he passed away. And we also know that we have a tradition that this cycle of history will last for 6,000 years. So if you take 6,000 and divide it by 120, you get 50. 50 times 120 equals 6,000. And Rav Ginsburg says that that could be the source of what the Zohar is saying, that every 50 years, the soul of Moshe is present in reality, in humanity, in history. So this obviously is a very, very deep idea here, a very deep idea. And I just want to say a little bit more about Ibur, this idea of impregnation. So first of all, the Ari explains that when an Ibur is happening, a person is not aware. It's not like a person wakes up one day and says, oh, I think so-and-so just impregnated itself. But what we do feel sometimes is a rush of inspiration. Many times, let's say we have a problem in our lives. It could be something, we're not talking about little problems. We're talking about major obstacles in our life, or major personality traits that we are struggling with. And then sometimes after years of trying to find a solution or working on it, we get a rush of clarity, and we're able to overcome something that we just haven't been able to overcome for, could be years. And there's no proof that that is happening because of an Ibur, but it's a possibility. It's a possibility that that is what is occurring. And like we said, it could be this idea of soul, root souls, families of like souls is a very, very important part of the Ari's teaching about reincarnation. And this is the idea of the expression, Kol Yisrael Aravin Zeh Lezeh. All of Israel is responsible one for the other. The word in Hebrew for responsible is actually the same root in a different order of Ayin Bet Resh, of Ibur. And so at a deeper level, it means all of the souls of Israel are mixed together. Erev, like the evening prayer, is called Aravit or Ma'ariv. But it comes from this root, which means the mixing of light and darkness. that even though we can pray the evening prayer virtually the entire night, the ideal time is as soon as it becomes dark. The 3 stars come out, or even earlier, when light and darkness the dark is starting to overcome the light. It's called a mixture of light and darkness. That is what the evening prayer is named for. So it's the same thing for this. The word for responsibility also means a mixture. Why is all of Israel responsible one for the other? Is because our souls are intrinsically and essentially mixed up one with the other. The unity of souls, the ultimate, that really all of Israel is part of one soul. So this is a very, very important idea about Ibor. And like we said, it could last for a very, very short time. Just it's almost like we think of like a guardian angel. That sometimes in life we're in like a tight spot, or like a crisis or something like that, and we feel just like saved, like just the personal redemption just comes in a flash, and what was looking like a disaster in the making, somehow we get beyond it. And sometimes we think, either symbolically or for real, that my guardian angel must have been like looking over me and helping me in this situation. It's a very similar kind of idea, or that simply that God helped. I asked for help, prayed, called out to God, and the solution came. But sometimes what the Ari is trying to tell us is sometimes the solution comes that a soul is sent to assist us by becoming impregnated within us. But again, it could just be for a very, very short time. It's not like reincarnation, which lasts for a whole lifetime. So this is just a very, very deep understanding of verse 26 of this parsha. Okay, now, as I mentioned before, this is the only other time that the giving of the Torah is repeated. It's given in Parshat Yitro, in the book of Shemot. And here, Moshe repeats the 10 commandments, but he also repeats the whole lead up to it, the whole experience, because some of the people he's speaking to might not have been at Har Sinai. And so he wants to give over this cardinal experience, this formative experience in Jewish history, to a new generation. And here, we're just going to focus on one detail. And that is, in the first Luchot, first of all, we'll see that the 10 commandments are the same in both the Parsha of Yitro and here, in general. But the wording in some of them is different. And of course, there's much commentary about why the differences in the wording. So we're only going to focus on one of these, and that is in the 4th commandment, which is Shabbat, the commandment to keep Shabbat. So in the first Luchot, we're told it was written Zachor. Remember the Shabbat day to make it holy. In the second tablets, and that is what Moshe is giving over here, because we know that Moshe broke the first tablets in response to the golden calf, and he came down with the second tablets on Yom Kippur. And that's where the difference is. The wording of the Ten Commandments, even though in general they're the same commandments, but the wording is somewhat different in some of them. And so in the second tablets, it's written Shemor, to guard the Shabbat, where in the first Luchot, it says to remember the Shabbat. And so in the beautiful song or poem that we sing on Kabbalat Shabbat, Lecha Dodi. So the first stanza is Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad. That God said, guard and remember in one word. So what is that referring to? It's actually referring to something much bigger. Is Rashi brings the tradition back in Parshat Yitro that when God first spoke to the people, he said or expressed or enunciated all 10 of the commandments in one saying. And Rashi points out in a way that no person could possibly understand. In other words, it wasn't just that Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad. It was all 10 commandments God said in like one word, b'dibur echad. And then God went back and said it word by word. And yet we know from Parshat Yitro and from this Parsha, the people only heard the first 2 commandments directly from God. And then they came to Moshe and said, you speak to God and you tell us what he says, because we're too fearful. And the tradition, going back to the first account of the giving of the 10 commandments, is that every word that God spoke was so awesomely powerful, their souls left their bodies. It was beyond human capability to receive it. And the Midrash says that God sent angels and returned their souls to their bodies. The next word, it happens again. Their souls leave their bodies. After 2 commandments, the people come to Moshe and say, we can't handle this. It's too much for us. You speak to God and you tell us what God says. So here, let's just look at this idea of Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, to guard and to remember the Shabbat. So it's explained in, we'll call it the simple literal understanding, that zachor means all of the positive things that we do to make Shabbat holy and special. And the Shamor is all the things that we have to guard, meaning all of the 39 major prohibitions of work that we don't do. And of the 39, it leads to really hundreds of details. And so these are the 2 aspects of Shabbat. There's the positive, and we won't call it the negative. In fact, it's the prohibitions that open up the positive aspect. So it's not like good and not good. Absolutely not like that. That the whole secret of Shabbat is the resting, is to cease from doing work that allows us to enter into a different consciousness, a different mental space, a very meditative kind of inner dimension kind of space. That's what we're told. We get an extra soul in Shabbat. But that extra soul is coming because of the prohibitions of Shabbat. This is a huge misnomer that people don't understand about Shabbat. Many people who are not raised with Shabbat look at Shabbat and they only see you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do this, and this is a modern world. This just doesn't fit. But that's missing the point completely of the positive space that comes out of the resting on Shabbat, of not being involved in all of these forbidden works. So the Ramban says something very interesting. He says that actually in both the first and the second tablets, in a sense, it's written Zachor, to remember. But the people were not on the level. And as he says, Moshe, what he heard was Zachor. But what the people heard was Shamor. That they were more involved in what all the things you can't do, and had less of an innate understanding of how that leads to the positive of Shabbat. Also, we want to say that to understand how Shabbat, which is the fourth of the commandments, follows the first three. Now, we're told that there are two tablets. And we're told that the first tablets are the laws between God and man. And the second is between man and man. Of course, woman and woman. We have to get our gender correct here. So the first tablets are between God and man. So the first three are very understandable. The first one is belief in God and belief in divine providence. The second one is to not have any other powers that we depend on other than God. And the third one is learning not to take God's name in vain, meaning to have a sense of awe and respect in relationship to God. Those are the first three. And then comes Shabbat. And we can see when we make Kiddush and in the prayers of Shabbat, where in short, what we could say is by our keeping Shabbat, we are the witnesses. We are giving testimony in our belief that God created the heaven and the earth, and he rested on the seventh day. That it was God who set up this divine cycle of time, but that it goes all the way back to the beginning. And so we could think of Shabbat on our level of oneg, of pleasure, that we get a day of rest. But when we look at the Ten Commandments, that Shabbat is also the way that we announce to the world that we are God's messengers, we are God's witnesses, that God is the creator. And then the next one, the fifth one, is the idea of honoring your father and your mother. And so people ask, isn't that between man and man? But the explanation of why it's on the first of the tablets is the closest that we can come in human relationships to understanding a proper relationship to God is through the respect and the awe and the acknowledgement and the thankfulness that we exhibit towards our parents. It's a lifelong relationship and has a lot to do with respect and honoring. And so this is how we learn to honor God and to respect God, because we have an example in this life. So that's just to explain the flow of the first 5. And then the next 5, these are obviously laws between human beings. And I'll just end at this insight. So there's a very well-known, we'll call it a disagreement, but it's not really a disagreement. It's more a way of looking at the world between Shammai and Hillel. And it has to do with Shabbat. And so it's said that Shammai, that starting on Sunday, he was already Zachor. He was already remembering the next Shabbos. So if he went to the market and he saw a beautiful fish or a beautiful pomegranate or like beautiful vegetables, so he would buy them for the honor of the coming Shabbat. In other words, everything he remembered Shabbat always. Hillel was different. Hillel was, we'll call it, he had, it's not really like this, but he had like more trust that it's only Sunday. Who says I'm not going to find a better fish on Wednesday or better apples? So I'll wait, and I will get the best, but I don't have to get it from the beginning of the week. And we're told that the halacha is like Hillel. In other words, we don't have to, like everything that we see is like, oh, this has to be for Shabbat. But nonetheless, Shammai is teaching us something very, very deep. And we see that in our prayers, we say every day, this is the first day of Shabbat, when the Levites would recite the following psalm in the temple. And this is the second day of Shabbat. In other words, the week is called Shabbat. And so here we see that even from Sunday, it's in the context of the week, which culminates and has its peak on Shabbat. So that's a little bit like Shammai. It's that everything reminds us, Zachor, everything is a remembrance of Shabbat. So now that we've mentioned this idea of Shabbat, along with our observing the Shabbat, because it's a commandment to keep the Shabbat, and we get tremendous pleasure and rest and spiritual input from Shabbat. But it's also this idea that our keeping Shabbat is the way that we testify and we become witnesses to the whole world, this idea of God as the creator, and that God created in 6 days, however we understand that. And it was God who established the Shabbat. It wasn't society that decided that a day of rest would be good for the workers. This is a divine cycle of time that God established. So it's interesting that in this parsha, we also have the Shema. And one of the absolute essential understandings of the Shema is found in the two big letters that are found in the Shema. It's the only verse in the Torah that has two big letters. And that's the ayin of Shema, of hear. Hear, Israel, God our God, God is one. So the ayin of the word hear, Shema, is big. And the daled of echad, of one, God is one, is big. So when you read that, ayin daled, it's ed, it's witness. So we have the same idea with the Shema, along with many, many other intentions of when we say the Shema. But one of the most basic is our reciting the Shema is a constant reminder to ourselves of our mission in this world, and a constant reminder to the nations of the world that we are God's representatives, we are God's messengers in this world. So the fact that both the retelling of the Ten Commandments and the Shema are in the same parsha. So let's learn a little bit about the Shema. I think many of you are aware that one of the books I wrote is called Shema Yisrael, Judaism's main statement, cardinal statement of faith. 200 meditations. Now there's 200 insights, perspectives that we can use to meditate on the Shema. So I'm just going to give little snippets of different kavanot that we can have. So it begins with Shema, to hear, and all the commentaries explain that it doesn't literally mean to hear, though there is actually a literal understanding that our ears should hear that which we say when we say the Shema. Meaning, saying the Shema needs to be audible, not mental. In other words, we have to say it. We don't have to scream it, but it should be enunciated with the lips, and our ears should hear that we're saying the Shema. We should hear the words. That's the simple understanding. But we know that when we received the Ten Commandments, beforehand, the people said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will hear. And there, the understanding is very clearly, we will do, and even if we don't understand now, we will do it, and then hopefully we will come to understand through the doing of it. But we'll do it anyways, even if we don't understand, because God, you commanded it, and we trust that it must be for our good. But obviously, the ultimate idea is that we should understand everything that we're doing, everything that we're praying, everything that we're learning. So that's the first understanding. When it says Shema Yisrael, is the idea that we should understand this concept of God's oneness. Now, we have a beautiful idea here, is there's many, many discussions about the differences and the connections between sight and hearing. What's the difference of seeing something and hearing something? Because here it says, hear Israel. It doesn't say see. You should see that God is one. It says you should hear that God is one. But if you take the three letters of Shema, it stands for Sa'u Merom Einechem. Lift up your eyes. So the Sa'u is the shin. Lift up your eyes above. Marom means above. So those three letters of Sa'u Merom Einechem, that's the ayin of Einechem, spells Shema. So here we have a unification of seeing and hearing. Because on a certain level, we are supposed to see God's oneness in the world. And the rest of the verse is V'yira'u mi bara'ela. In other words, lift up your eyes, really like to the heavens, and see mi bara'ela. Who created these? You can imagine we're out in a starry night, and we're looking at, thousands of stars. Sometimes you can see the Milky Way, and we say, who created this? And so it's brought down that if you take the words me and Ela, who created this? You take the words for who and these, it spells Elohim. These are the letters of Elohim. So we could read it, Elohim created these. Now, the answer is in the question. So this idea of the unification of sight and hearing is connected to the giving of the Ten Commandments, because we're told that part of the experience is that we could see the sounds of the shofar. And Rashi explains, this is what's called in modern science synesthesia, where our senses cross. And it's a real thing that sometimes you can see sounds. You can hear sights. One of the ways, it's not exactly what it means, but if anyone has been to like a laser show and the music is being translated through the computer to motions of forms and colors. So if the music stops, the whole picture goes away. Every note is a ray of light. So this is like seeing the sounds. But here we're talking at a much, much higher level. And that it was the experience at Mount Sinai, that the seven heavens were opened up. All of our senses, in a sense, were merged together. And we had this prophetic experience. So the hint that sight is included in the word to hear, Shema, Su'u Marom Einechem, is hinting that saying the Shema, if we really would meditate on it, is a spiritual, even prophetic experience. It can be if we meditate on the Shema in the proper way. So just because of a lack of time, I'm going to go on to the next word, Yisrael. Shema Yisrael. Hear Israel. So there are, again, so many ideas here. But here we're going to go back when it says, hear Israel. What it's really saying, hear Israel, what your mission in the world is. Your mission is the same mission of Avram Avinu, to testify and give witness to the reality of one God and the reality of the unity of all existence. And so when it says Shema Yisrael, it's like a wake-up call. It's not just that we're giving witness about God's oneness. It's reminding us of our mission of being witnesses to God's oneness. And here I'm just going to bring a couple of very, very short hints that we know that it was Yaakov who merits the name Yisrael. When he fights with the angel of Esav, he's also fighting his inner, call it inner demons. He's fighting with God to understand his destiny in the world. But that archetypal wrestling match is when he merits to be transformed, transfigured from being Yaakov to Yisrael. And Rav Ginsburg brings an awesome gematria that according to Rashi, who is Yaakov fighting with? The angel of Esav. Who is the angel of Esav? Satan, the Satan. So Rav Ginsburg says if you take the numerical value of Yaakov, which is 182, and you add it to Satan, in other words, in the wrestling match, they were like kind of merged together in the fight, that the result of that, if you add 359, which is Satan, and 182, which is Yaakov, it equals exactly Yisrael, 541. So Rav Ginsburg explains that this archetypal wrestling match between, we'll call the forces of good and evil or light and darkness, but it was also the light and darkness within Yaakov himself, not just an outside kind of darkness, also within himself. Through that wrestling match, he merited to become Yisrael. So here we see something very interesting. How did Yaakov get his name in the first place? Yaakov comes from the word ekev, heel, because he was holding on to the heel of Esav when he came out of the womb. Of course, that has tremendous symbolism to it. But here, the heel is the bottom of the body. So Yaakov comes into the world kind of holding on to the heel of Esav. If you take the word Yisrael and you permute the letters, it spells Li Rosh. To me is a head. To me is a brain, is a seichel, is intelligence. So here we see that when Yaakov becomes Yisrael, the transformation symbolically is from the heel to the head. And that's what, and we actually have a custom that on Rosh Hashanah, we eat the head of a fish. And we say, God, please bless us to be the head and not the tail. Like a fish has a head and a tail. Well, a human being has a head and a heel. And so this transformation, it's speaking to all of us to go from being in a certain way a heel to being a head. And this is in a certain way the destiny of the Jewish people. That for a good part of history, we've been treated as the heel. And ultimately, we will be revealed as the head. And again, because of a lack of time, we'll just end with the idea of Hashem Echad. God is one. So one of the concepts that we've discussed many times is called Shalem V'Chetzi, a whole and a half. And that many, many words in Hebrew, in the Chumash, are a relationship of a whole to a half, or 2 to 1, or 1 to a half. And many of the measurements in the Mishkan is a secret of a whole and a half. It's a secret of bringing the half shekel for the Mishkan, for the temple, not a whole one, but a half. And so the words Hashem Echad, God is one. So the name of God, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, equals 26, and the word Echad equals 13. So that 26 and 13 is a whole and a half. And the relationship between a whole and a half is, in our relationship to God, God is the whole, and as it were, we're the half. But when the half holds on to the whole, then it feels like the whole. When you have husband and wife, so you have two different individual people, and together they make a whole. And yet each person is really only a half of the whole. The whole relationship is based on a whole and a half. So that's one of the secrets of Hashem Echad, a whole and a half. The word Echad, of course, equals 13. And the other very important word that equals 13 is love, ahava. And so when we say the Shema in our prayers, the blessing before, in the morning and the evening, they're different, but each one has the word ahava in it, God's love for us. And then in the first passage after the Shema, the first thing we say is V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, v'chol levavcha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol moedecha. And you shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. So it's like an ahava sandwich. The Shema is in between, and the blessing before and our statement afterwards is both about God's love to us and our love to God. And in the middle, the Shema is saying that Hashem is Echad. Echad and Ava equal 13. The Zohar says, when we say that God is one, the Zohar says, Echad v'lo v'chushban. God is one, but not the one of mathematics. In other words, God is not 1, 2, 3, 4. Even though we could say 1 represents, it's all by itself. It's not 2, but the Zohar is saying no. God's oneness is so unique. It's not the same of saying the one of mathematics. And I believe it's the Art Scroll and many other translations that sometimes now, instead of saying that God is one, Hashem Echad, is God is unique. In other words, God's oneness is totally unique. It says in the Gemara, they ask an amazing question, because there's this idea that God keeps all of the mitzvot. On some level, God keeps all of the mitzvot. And there's this idea that God wears tefillin. Now, of course, we're talking in totally symbolic language. So the Gemara asks, well, we know what's in our tefillin, what's written is the Shema, among other things. But the Shema is one of the most important things written in our tefillin. So they ask, well, what is written in God's tefillin? So in other words, in our tefillin, again, we're declaring that God is one. So the Gemara answers, and it's part of the Mincha service on Shabbat, where we say, Atah echad, v'shimcha echad, u'mika amcha Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz. We say to God, you are one, because in your name is one. And who is like your people, one people in the land? That's what's in God's tefillin. So this idea of oneness also applies to Am Yisrael. And like we said before, in the bigger picture, all of Am Yisrael is sharing one soul. That's what it says. We're all mixed together. We're all responsible for each other because we're all essentially one soul. And this is actually spoken about Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu, his whole mission was to spread the teaching of one God, monotheism. And yet, in two different places, it says, Echad haya Avram, that Avram was one, also meaning unique. And of course, some of you have it, but one of my books is called One Was Avram, the whole life story of Avram. But I picked those words because Avram was totally unique. And the subtitle of the book is the reflections on the most influential person in all of history. And that was Avram. He was totally unique. So just like God is one and unique, so Abraham is one and unique. So these are just a few beautiful kavanot. We did the word Shema, to hear, the word Yisrael, and the word Echad, and Hashem Echad. But in the book I wrote, there's 200 meditations. The Kamarna Rebbe, so he had a commentary where he had 248 explanations of the Shema. So we should all be inspired that when we say the Shema, there's so many different allusions and hints and important concepts to be concentrating on. We should all merit to be able to say the Shema with this great kind of kavanah.